for us to get there. But it takes much longer because collective life doesn't have the same imagination. Collective life doesn't have the same flexibility. Collective life doesn't have the same disposition of caring for the well-being of others. They're so caught in self-interest that it's very difficult. You need a lot of time to pass by. We're still wrestling with whether or not apologies are owed to African Americans for the experience of slavery. And we've done minor attempts here and there to do things like that. But it's complicated to do. It's not impossible, but it's very complicated. And it takes a lot of passing away for most of the agents involved in that not to exist in order to bring it out. But at the personal level, I think it's possible. I think it's healthy if it's accompanied by a disposition to actually engage in practices that are reconciling and kind of community building.
We don't make peace with our friends, we make peace with our enemies. And I think that there is historical precedent with Israel, since the question was specifically about Israel and Palestine, that if Israel was able to make peace with Egypt, with Jordan, if we were able to have Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat and shake hands on the White House lawn, then anything is possible. Especially because it took Menachem Begin, a Likudnik, a far right wing, who himself was involved in the Irgun, in the creation of the State of Israel, with the bombing of the King David Hotel. And then it took someone like Yitzhak Rabin, who was a military leader of the Six-Day War, and then the raid on Entebbe. That it's not the meek who make the peace; it's the strong. And so I'm hopeful that during our lifetimes there will be an Israel and a Palestine living side by side in mutually well-defined and recognized borders, and that they'll be each other's biggest trading partners. And I think that what will come from that is a kind of reconciliation that has not been possible up to this point. And I think there's a lesson that we can draw from the experience of not the Israelis, but the Israelites in the wilderness. That took them 40 years to go a couple of hundred miles, which you can now do, as I've done. You can go through the Sinai Peninsula on the back of a motorbike, and it takes you a lot less than 40 years. But the experience of getting through the wilderness and then getting a generation that had not experienced the slavery in Mitzrayim was able to come to the promised land. I'm hopeful that with the passage of time that there will be moderates who come out on both sides and throughout the world's conflicts who are able to fulfill the vision that we see. I think is one of Judaism's gifts to the world. It's now, ironically, of course, Judaism's best friend, the United Nations. It's inscribed on the wall of the United Nations in English, but it's V'chitatu charvotam le'itim v'chanitotehem lemazmeirot lo yisa goy el goy chera v'lo yilmedu od milchama. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and neither will they study war anymore. That this is a messianic hope that not describing, as religion is wont to do, how the world is today, but how the world should be, and that humanity has a part as God's partners in creation in bringing that about. That we're not free. We're not free to desist from the task of getting involved in making the world a better place, not just for ourselves, but for everybody. Sometimes it involves conflict, but if the Messiah should come, then it won't.
All right. This may be the last question or close to the last. How do we get there from here? What are the resources in what you do in teaching and in guiding students, as all of us do? What is it that we do to move towards that place where the swords are beaten into pruning hooks? Dr. Garcia?
That's an interesting one. I think one of the things we really ought to do insofar as members of religious communities, is to really uplift the commitments to peace, justice, equality, freedom that are intrinsic to our own religious communities, and really showing how important it is to live by those principles, to cultivate those principles, to have them as the core values that enable us to relate internally and to other people outside of our communities in ways that are inclusive, in ways that are fair, in ways that are humane. As I think about, for example, this whole development of modern terrorism, which is by and large religiously grounded, and all our religions have expressions of it, how important it is for us to countervail those tendencies in showing how contrary to the essence of what it means to be a people of faith, of whatever faith it is, how contrary those practices are, and how intentional we have to be to cultivate alternatives to that, and then spread that among each other. I think that's the main task we have confronting us today.
I think that in living as a part of a multi-ethnic, multiracial, multi-gender, multicultural world, not just to be politically correct, but because just as we don't make peace with our friends, we make peace with our enemies. If we only talk to, live amongst, deal with people who think as we do, then we never learn anything. So my work, I'm the executive director of Hillel, which is the Jewish Student Center a couple of blocks from here. We have students, most of the students who come through are Jewish, but many are not, are involved in social justice programs or other things like that they're not specifically Jewish. But I think that the best hope for our future is for people to meet people who do not look or act like they do not think like they do, not so that they can convince each other that the other is wrong, but so that they can learn from each other in true dialogue. Because you can't, it's much harder to demonize an other whom you've met and have heard their stories. And one of the people with whom I work very closely who's here today has taught me to remember in every dealing with another human being that every human being's life is sacred, not just because they were created in the image of God, but every person has something in him or her to make the world a better place. And you have to, like Moses, who realized that the bush burned unconsumed, you have to spend the time with that person to realize that the bush is burning unconsumed, and to see what it is that is sacred or special in that other person. And if we only do that with people who are like ourselves, then we miss out. And so I'm enriched every day in working with students from the University of Texas at Austin, that it's quite diverse across the street there. And we, as all part of this community, can just support that and encourage young people of every age to think beyond their own limitations.
Dr. Azam?
Okay. I think that what I try to bring to my work in the classroom is, and I'm speaking here about what I do when I'm talking to the Muslims in my classroom, because that's where, this question is heading. So one of the things that I try to encourage, and also outside of the classroom, is for Muslims to take an honest look at their history, because Muslims, by and large, do not know much about their history. And I mean, we learn a little bit about kind of the early period, the life of the Prophet, the Advent, the four companions or so. And then there's this big blur where it's like the Umayyads and the Abbasids, and there's a bunch of this and this and this and that, and then we land at Hassan al-Banna or Sayyid Qutb or someone like that. So we have to know our history, and we have to also know our ethical, legal